Perfect, thank you. As always, we are recording this meeting and we'll go ahead and put that on our YouTube page afterwards if you'd like to recapture any parts of this meeting. Let me go ahead and share. We just have a couple of announcements to go over real quick. So first of all, there we go. Okay, so first of all, we have presentations today from SFMTA and from VTA. Looking forward to those. So I'll try to get through these as quickly as possible to get straight to those. I just want to go ahead and announce that we have, we're currently still working on our June topic. We were hoping to get something together with CCTA, but unfortunately the speaker had a conflict. So June 15th won't be happening, but we'll see if we can get another date in June. In July, we'll be having presentations on SB6, AB 2011. That's the residential in certain commercial districts bill from Heather Peters at MTC. She'll also be speaking on Senate Bill 9. That's the lot split / ADU in single family housing bill. In August, as is tradition, instead of having our own meeting, we'll be encouraging all of our membership to attend the Western District and International Joint Meeting in Portland. And then in September, we are currently scheduling a meeting for BART Earthquake Preparedness and Response. And so that meeting and our July meeting will likely be in person. We're still working on the details for that, but keep an ear out for those. I see, as always, Mark is here today. Thanks for being here. I'll turn it over to him for a quick second if you have any announcements for the Western District.
No, nothing new that you haven't covered, except it's really nice to see our Western District President presenting today on the project in San Francisco. So welcome, Kimberly. Looking forward to your presentation, as well as the presentation from VTA. This is a good one.
And I believe, isn't the early bird registration for the annual meeting ending at some point in the next month here?
It is, and a good deal of the hotel block is already also taken. So we're securing additional room nights because it's going to be a pretty well attended conference in Portland this summer. So take a look at that. Make sure that you're registered if you're going, because I think the early bird is going to expire, I think, in mid-June, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't looked at it recently, but we are getting a very strong response.
Oh, perfect. All right, thank you for that. So we only have 2 items left on the agenda, the social media minutes as well as future presentations. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So for the social media minute, as always, we like to request if you are comfortable turning on your camera to go ahead and do that. We'll have everyone give a wave, take a picture. We have 60 people here today, so this is a fantastic turnout. So I'll give everyone a second to turn on your camera if you wish to participate. The camera's coming on. Glad to see everyone's faces here today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take a picture here in 1, 2, 3, cheese. All right, thank you everyone for that. Feel free to return back to your camera on or off ways as preferred. And with that, I think I've said enough, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kimberly for our first presentation. Take it away, Kim. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Let me share my screen here. All right, are folks able to see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
All right, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Kimberly Leung, and I'm the ITE Western District President. I'm also an engineer with the SFMTA Lowell Street Subdivision and the project manager for the Valencia Bikeway Improvements Project. So thanks for inviting me today to present on the Mid-Valencia Bikeway pilot project. This project was actually approved by the SFMTA board in early April to pilot a center running bikeway on Valencia Street between 15th and 23rd Streets for up to 12 months. So the Valencia Bikeway Improvements Project has been this ongoing effort to improve safety for people who bike and walk on Valencia Street. Valencia is the major north-south bike route through the Mission neighborhood in San Francisco. It is a commercial corridor, has on average 8,500 vehicles and 3,100 cyclists per day. Unfortunately, most of this corridor is on the Vision Zero high injury network, which is the 12% of city streets that account for 68% of severe and fatal collisions. So the SFMTA board previously approved a pilot for parking protected bikeways and a curb management plan on Valencia between Market and 15th Streets. That's just north of the project area that I'll be talking about today. That project was installed in early 2019 and was evaluated before we returned to the board for approval of a permanent installation. In early 2020, we brought forward to an open house a proposal for parking protected bikeways, so continuing that same design on Valencia between 19th Street and Cesar Chavez. Unfortunately, there was opposition to this design, and we actually received numerous requests from individual businesses, merchant associations, and faith institutions to consider a center running design to reduce impacts to the curb lane. But before we could finish working through concerns on the parking protected design with the community, the project was paused due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then since then, the landscape of Valencia has really changed following COVID, particularly with the expansion of our shared spaces program here in San Francisco. So we did resume work on Valencia in spring of 2020, and we chose to focus our design efforts on Mid-Valencia between 15th and 23rd Streets because we wanted to provide connectivity to the protected bikeways north of this section. So again, from our 2020 outreach, we heard clearly the need to balance bike and pedestrian safety improvements, but also loading spaces in the corridor for merchants and access for residents. We also heard the importance of maintaining the shared spaces or curbside parklets on Valencia as part of the overall project. So this image from Google Street View from April 2022 really highlights the challenges that we're trying to address in the project. Here you can see the competing needs of the corridor. There's new shared spaces along the curb, vehicles pulling across existing bike lanes to get to and from parking spaces, and even vehicles double parking in the bike lanes itself. So for this pilot project, we identified 3 key goals, which are to improve safety for all who travel on Valencia Street, to preserve the economic vitality of the corridor, and to ensure the movement and access of goods and people. Just taking a really quick look at the data here, Valencia between 15th and 23rd Streets is on the high injury network. From 2018 to 2022, there were 132 collisions, including a fatality on this section of the corridor. Another pedestrian was also killed at the intersection of 16th and Valencia in January of this year. Within the project limits itself, 40% of the collisions are between vehicles and bikes. The most common reasons for collisions involving a bicyclist were because of unsafe turns, lane changes, and dooring by drivers. So there's currently this mismatch between the high demand for the curb space, but also the amount of available space for loading. So this has really resulted in vehicles double parking in the bike and vehicle lanes. And then in addition to that, another 22% of the collisions on the street are between vehicles and peds. The most common reason for those collisions are drivers failing to yield the right of way at a crosswalk. So getting into the design itself, to address the ongoing safety challenges on Valencia, our pilot includes a suite of tools. We have bicycle safety improvements, pedestrian safety improvements, turn restrictions, and curb management. From the pedestrian standpoint, to increase pedestrian safety, every intersection will include daylighting, which are red zones, to increase visibility among all the different roadway users, and advanced limit lines, which show drivers where they should be stopping. All left turns off of Valencia onto the side streets will no longer be allowed, and no right turn or red regulations are being introduced at certain intersections. And these turn restrictions are important for pedestrian and bicycle safety, regardless of the bikeway design. The project also includes a complementary curb management plan, which includes a reconfigured curb layout, new cross-street meters, and the application of dual use zones and general loading zones. And I'll talk a little bit more about those new loading zones later on in the presentation. But the main design element of this pilot is the center running bikeway that will be accompanied by bikeway separation materials, bike signals, and bike boxes. So let's get into the details of that bikeway design. So to kind of introduce you to Valencia, this is a cross-section showing what Valencia Street is like today. Between 15th and 19th Streets, Valencia is currently 52.5 feet wide with 15-foot wide sidewalks. And there's currently 1 lane in each direction with painted bicycle lanes on both sides of the street. There is also generally curb space on both sides of the street for loading activities and shared spaces. On the bottom of the slide, this shows Valencia between 19th and 23rd Streets, a very, very similar cross-section, but the one exception is that this section has narrower sidewalks that are 10 feet wide So there is additional roadway space for a two-way left turn lane in the center of the roadway. So with our pilot project, we will be installing a 12-foot wide center running protected bikeway. For those of you that have been to San Francisco and have ridden the two-way bikeway on the Embarcadero outside the ferry building, that bikeway itself is 12 feet wide. So this Valencia center running bikeway will be separated from vehicle travel lanes with a painted buffer that will include new bikeway separation materials. One lane of travel in each direction will be maintained, and curb space will also be maintained on both sides of the street. So this slide shows a design for the block between 15th and 16th Streets more specifically. North of 15th Street is an existing parking protected bikeway. So to help bikes safely transition between that curbside to the center running bikeway or vice versa, we are introducing a new bikeway signal and bike phases at the intersection of 15th and Valencia. This slide shows the design for the block between 22nd and 23rd Streets. Again, this is the slightly wider section of Valencia. So south of 23rd Street, there are painted bicycle lanes. So new bike signals and bike phases are also included at this intersection to, again, transition those bikes between the two different bikeway designs. And at the intersection of 22nd and Valencia, this is really showing our typical treatment that we'll be using to help bicycles turn on and off of the corridor using bike boxes. And because this section of the corridor is a little bit wider, we're able to dedicate more space to the buffer area that will be separating the bike lane from the vehicle travel lanes. So initial outreach for this project started in July of 2022. And in fall of 2022, we launched a virtual open house along with 2 virtual office hours to share this design. Our virtual open house had over 4,600 webpage views, and we received 618 comments and questions. So as you can imagine, it took us quite a while to get through all those comments and actually provide responses to that. But in general, feedback from community groups was mixed. Some people wanted no changes, but most people supported our goal to improve safety along Valencia Street. But people who opposed or remained neutral to the center running bikeway design were supportive of improving safety, but not necessarily of the design itself. But from the comments and questions that we received during the open house, these were the top 3 concerns. People wanted us to focus on the materials that we're using to separate the center running bikeway from the vehicle lanes. There were also concerns about the enforcement of illegal turns and loading behavior, and also how people would enter and exit the bikeway to access the mid-block businesses. So to address the concerns from the open house, we worked closely with our city partners to test more durable and robust bikeway separation materials. So K71 posts and bus lane curbs, both of these have not been used in San Francisco before. We will be introducing these in the buffers next to the bikeway. These materials, along with our typical delineators, are what we'll be using to really prevent that vehicle encroachment into the bikeway. And for people on the bikes who would like to enter and exit the bikeway mid-block, there will be occasional gaps in the bus lane curb material. And again, the intersections will have bike signals or bike boxes to help with that movement on and off of the center running bikeway. And then just touching a bit on the curb management piece of this project. So as I stated earlier, today in Valencia, there is this huge demand for loading. And because there isn't enough space at the curb, cars are overflowing into both the bike and vehicle lanes. So this curb management plan for the project we're going to reconfigure the color curbs to better meet the demands of the corridor. And there are 2 new tools that we're using. Those are the general loading zones and dual use zones. So general loading zones were first introduced by the MTA in 2021. These zones allow people to pick up or drop off goods using personal vehicles, and they are allowed to leave their vehicle unattended for up to 5 minutes. And there are other instances where we're choosing to combine the general loading zones with commercial loading for trucks and vehicles, and we're creating what we're calling a dual use zone. So this is a zone where there's 2 regulations in the same curb space at different times of the day. Most of the new dual use zones on Valencia are commercial loading during the day and then general loading at night. And overall, we are implementing a very, very aggressive curb management plan to control those double parking issues that we see today. As you can see from this table, the amount of loading on the corridor is going to be doubled. And we're really reducing the number of general meter spaces that will be available on Valencia. The plan itself also does take a look at the side streets. So on the side streets, we are also introducing new general meter spaces as well as loading zones. So at the start of the presentation, I did say that we initially proposed continuing parking protected bikeways on Valencia, but the direction of the project did change with the onset of the COVID pandemic. So there's been a lot of discussion and feedback on the center running bikeway that was ultimately approved. So I'm going to take some time to walk you through the curbside, one-way protected bikeway design and kind of explain to you why this is not recommended, at least at this time for Valencia. So on this slide, you can see an example of what a curbside one-way protected bikeway would look like. There's bikeways on both sides of the street. So, I think there's, okay. And just with this alternative, the bikeways are shifted to be adjacent to the sidewalk, and then they're separated from the vehicle lane by either a floating curb lane or delineators. And this is a very typical design that we have on other sections of Valencia and also all over San Francisco. So this design was initially proposed as part of our efforts in early 2020. At that time, approximately 40% of the curb space would have been repurposed for the protected bikeways. With our shared spaces program that was introduced during COVID, one of the things with that program is that they do not typically permit floating parklets due to accessibility concerns. So with the curbside bikeway design, that bikeway does have to weave around the shared spaces. So with that weaving around the bikeway, it does reduce the available curb space for loading, and it also increases the unused space, particularly when the bikeway is making that transition to and from the curb. So that reduction of curb supply, it could result in more double parking or blocking of the bike lanes. But also more importantly, if this design were to be proposed for the section where Valencia is a little bit narrower, there would be more significant curb impacts. We would actually not be able to have parking and loading on both sides of the street. So in the wider section of Valencia between 19th and 23rd Streets, floating curb space can be installed on both sides of the roadway. However, in that narrower section of Valencia between 15th and 19th, floating curb space can only be maintained on one side of the street, as it's shown in this slide. The San Francisco Fire Department requires 26 feet of clear width for emergency response operations. So on this slide, you can see the floating loading on the top part of the image. But once you convert the opposite side of the street to floating loading, that means that the design doesn't meet the clear width requirements of the fire department. So here, loading can only be maintained curbside on the opposite side of the street, but the bikeway then cannot be protected with delineators or other materials. This is a variation of a protected bikeway, or this slide shows a variation of a protected bike lane on the opposite side of the street where all the curb space can be converted to shared spaces or other roadway activations. We could also do something where the bikeway can continue to weave back in towards the curb to allow a wider buffer between the vehicle lane and bike lane, but in general, there are greater impacts to the curb with this design. And then finally, since the shared spaces program typically doesn't permit floating parklets, the addition of any new shared spaces or even the removal of existing shared spaces, it would require us to constantly realign the bikeway. So in both situations, we're going to need to reconfigure the curb layout to meet the new loading needs of the block. And this process does take some time, in order to redesign the bikeway and to redo the curb plan. It will require us going to a public hearing every time before we would be allowed to remove and install the new roadway paint and delineators. Businesses right now are still continuing to adjust their operations, following COVID. So this curbside, one-way protected bikeway is just not really recommended right now while we kind of sort out our shared spaces program and the loading issues on the corridor. So just again, given the design constraints at this time, we are choosing to pilot a center running bikeway between 15th and 23rd Streets for up to 12 months. We will be fully evaluating this because we do recognize that this is a new and different design in the US and in San Francisco. So we will be looking at metrics, including safe behavior, effective design, and mobility as a part of our evaluation. So to really understand, if the behavior out there is safe, we will be observing user compliance with the new left turn restrictions and bicycle signals, vehicle speeds, and bicycle and pedestrian conflicts at the intersection. We'll also be looking at traffic collision data, vehicle loading behavior, the bike positioning on the street, bikeway ease of access, and emergency vehicle interactions with the bikeway to see, if the center running design is actually an effective design for Valencia. And we also want to understand the mobility trends. So we'll be taking a look at bicycle, pedestrian, and vehicle volumes, transit travel times, and changes in vehicle congestion levels. We'll also be doing intercept surveys to really understand where people are coming from, where they're visiting on the corridor, and how they're choosing to travel to and from Valencia now. So ultimately, all the findings from this evaluation will help inform the more long-term design for the corridor. And this project was approved on April 4th, and we did begin construction 20 days later. As a part of our project, we will be making observations and collecting data. Our first milestone for data collection will be this fall, 2023, and we'll also be taking a look at data some more in spring of 2024. By the end of this year, we are going back to the SFMTA board with some initial findings from our first evaluation period. Some other work that we're doing will be starting this summer. We'll be studying the long-term visions for Valencia and working with the community on additional pilot treatments that could help inform kind of the long-term vision for the corridor. So the study and these potential pilots will also be looking at placemaking and traffic circulations along the street to really just help further, the pedestrian and bicycle safety goals that the MTA as well as the community has for Valencia. So I will wrap up this presentation by sharing some photos of our construction over the last month. Thank you for joining me for today's presentation. And if you're interested in following the progress of the pilot, our website has weekly construction updates and photos. And you can also sign up to receive email updates on our project website. So I'm happy to take any questions that you all have.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Kimberly, for that excellent presentation. If you do have any questions, feel free to either type them in the chat and we'll read them out in the order in which they were received, or use the raise hand feature and we'll call those in the order in which hands are raised. I think we'll do questions until 12:30, in which we'll switch over to VTA's presentation. And then if we have time after, we'll take any additional questions at the end of the hour. While those questions are being formulated, people are typing them up or anything like that. One question I'd like to go ahead and ask is, you mentioned for the one-way bikeway alternative that part of the reason that was not chosen is that the fire department requires a 26-foot clear, and that includes delineators. So I was just wondering how the center bikeway, which also has delineators, is able to accomplish that clear.
So for the 26 feet clear, so with the one-way protected bikeway, the delineators actually don't count. They don't count as say like a parked car. So they can actually be within that clear width space. But in the narrower section of Valencia, if we were to do say parking protected on both sides, it's not possible for us to do that because the space between the two parked cars would be less than 26 feet. So if we were to pursue that design, we can do say on one side of the street, have that bike lane protected by cars, and then on the other side, have it protected by delineators, which is totally doable. But one of the bigger concerns from the community is just parking and loading and shared spaces. So with that design I just described, on one side of the street where we're only protecting the bike with delineators, we would have to remove all the parking and loading as well as the shared spaces, or potentially the shared spaces. We could also potentially weave around those, but the parking and loading for sure would have to go.
Makes sense. Thanks. Shruti asks, how did you address the opposition to the center running bike lanes, and could you share any initial data regarding safety with the pilot project?
So how did we address the opposition? Well, there's been so much feedback, I guess, on this project itself. We tried to work as closely as possible with folks. One of the things we tried to emphasize was that this is a pilot. We also try to emphasize that what we're trying to do here is that we heard the goals of the community, which was to maintain as much parking and loading as possible, which is a little bit different than how we would typically like to operate. But we were trying to explain that, we heard loud and clear from the community. They wanted us to look at a center running because that meant that their curbs were not going to be touched. And part of our evaluation plan is that we are constantly collecting data. We want to share as much data as possible. And I think that's also helping reassure folks that we it's not a pilot we're putting in and walking away and never looking at it again. We are constantly monitoring this to make sure that this bikeway actually operates, safely, but it's also meeting the needs of the community. Unfortunately, I don't have any new data to share just yet. We just started construction 31 days ago, but we will be doing our first data collection, hopefully at a 1 month mark in August, just to kind of see what's happening out there. But anecdotally, I can tell you that the no left turn signs have gone up and people are not quite following them just yet. So we are working closely with SFPD as well as our parking control officers to start showing some enforcement out there to really get people understanding how they should be traveling through here before the bikeway is fully open to the public.
Excellent, thank you. William asks, can businesses still request space for parklets if the area is used by the bike lane? Are businesses less likely to receive that parklet space if it is used by a bike lane?
So for this project, we are putting the bikeway in the middle of the street, so we wouldn't be impacting the curb space where businesses would be requesting a shared space parklet. But in general, for the shared spaces program, if there is an existing bike lane curbside, it does make it really difficult for a business to then apply for a shared space. They would have to work closely with the MTA to either reconfigure that bikeway before they can then apply for a shared space. So I'm actually working on that with a different community where they are looking to introduce a shared space outside their business, and we're actually going to help them reconfigure the bikeway first, go through that legislative process, and that way there will be space available for them to actually request that shared space.
Great, thank you. Eric asks, so with the center running bike lane, you now have to change the signal phasing, and this will create more delays at the intersections. How will this be addressed to delay travel time for everyone?
So yes, absolutely. There are signal timing changes that are being made to help with the transition on and off of the center running bikeway. In general, what we're trying to prioritize at those intersections are our transit operators as well as our bikes. So unfortunately, there will be delay if you are in a private vehicle. One of the things that we have been doing to the signal timing changes is that we are increasing the cycle length. So currently it's 60 seconds for these intersections, but we will be increasing it to 75 seconds to hopefully fit everything in there.
Great, thank you. Matthew asks, how are bicyclists guided to get off the center running bike lane to access businesses?
Yeah, so there's two ways that you can choose to do that. One is at the intersections itself on the ends of the pilot project. There will be bike signals to help with getting on and off of the bikeway and to also transition to the center running bikeway. For all the other intersections in between, there are bike boxes for both the left and the right turns to help you get off of the center running bikeway. For people who choose to exit the center running bikeway mid-block, there will be gaps in our bus lane curve material about every 90 feet or so. So if you would like to exit mid-block, you're able to do that as well. And I know that this is kind of new and different, so there will also be educational materials that we're producing when the project construction is wrapping up to help people figure out how to kind of use the new bikeway.
Great, thank you. So we have two more questions. I think we'll get to these two questions and then switch it over to VTA. So Siching asks, wondering if you could know the split between bicycle through trips and bicycle trips from or to this commercial corridor. As a bicyclist myself, I'd imagine it's not easy to make a stop if I stay on the center bikeway.
That's a really great question. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that. That will be something that we're going to try to learn a little bit more about through our intercept survey that we'll be doing later this fall.
And then Jake asks, were two-way side running separated bikeways considered, and would that be considered for a permanent design?
Yeah, so for the sake of length of this presentation, there were other alternatives that were considered, including a two-way bikeway on one side of the roadway or even pedestrianizing the corridor. But both of those concepts do require more time to do studies. Some of them also do require more capital. So we didn't feel like those two concepts, including the two-way on one side of the street, would fit within this kind of quick build time frame. We wanted to make improvements immediately to Valencia while we work on the long-term vision. So it's definitely on the table for long-term. It just wasn't quite on the table for an improvement this year.
And I know I said we'd only do those two, but I only see one more question, so maybe we'll go ahead and do that. And then if anyone else has any other questions, we'll go ahead and answer those after the VTAs presentation and question and answer session. So the last question for this presentation for now is, although the project will increase cycle length at intersections, is it possible that vehicle volumes on Valencia will decrease such that total delays across all vehicles may not increase? Asked by Jill.
Yeah, that is actually one of the things that we think could potentially happen, particularly with that decrease in general meter parking and that increase in loading. If you're someone that's coming to Valencia in a private vehicle, you don't want to be driving down this corridor. There is nowhere for you to park. So we're kind of curious, like what the changes to like ADT would be like on this corridor. So that's definitely something that we'll be collecting data on as a part of our evaluation.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kimberly, for that presentation and for this question and answers. It looks like an exciting project, and I wish it all the success. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brent and Lola from VTA. So go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. We appreciate you inviting a couple planners here for your ITE meeting. I am Lola Torney. I'm a transportation planner with VTA. I'm joined by my colleague Brent, who you'll hear from soon, Brent Pearse. And in case you're unaware, VTA is both the transit operator for Santa Clara County, but also we are the CMA and the CTA. So we're going to be talking to you about some of the other work that we've been doing over the last several years, including the Central Bikeway Study and bicycle superhighways. So VTA adopted the countywide bicycle plan in 2018. It introduced the idea of bicycle superhighways, which we defined as high quality, uninterrupted, long distance bikeways separated from motor vehicles that traverse across the county. We see the network as consisting of high quality, low stress, on-street bikeways and trails. And here you see a few examples of bike superhighways elsewhere in the world. And so you can see the bike superhighways can have varying designs that provide separation from vehicles and provide low stress. So in our next slide, we're going to answer, so what makes a bikeway super? What is a bike superhighway? They are quickly direct. They don't require bicyclists to weave around side streets or take back roads. So there's a direct and easy route for bicyclists. They're accessible. They take you where you want to go. They are dedicated. They offer bicyclists their own space that is separated from motorists and pedestrians. And they are efficient. They reduce delay for bicyclists. And most importantly, in my opinion, they are attractive. They are a pleasure to ride on. They bring people joy and really want people to ride bikes. And so in 2021, our VTA board adopted the Bicycle Superhighway Implementation Plan that proposed a bicycle superhighway network that would serve our county. We narrowed the proposed list down to 17 corridors. We had like 35 to start with and narrowed it down to 17. And most of the networks build off our existing trails. They're labeled here on the map, you can see. Most of these trails actually run north-south. That's just based on the topology and geography of our county. Most of the trails run adjacent to our creeks and rivers, which run north-south. So when we were doing the outreach for our countywide bike plan, we kept hearing from folks, we really need an east-west bikeway. So we focused on that for our first study that we were calling the Central Bikeway Study. Go ahead. Brent, hit next slide. Boom, there it is. That really studied the east-west corridor from the city of Santa Clara up to North San Jose over into the east. And so here is a list of the final routes, all the 17 routes shown on the map. We used to have Central Bikeway Study, which is underlined here in the requires further study to determine feasibility. We were able to, through the Central Bikeway Study that we'll talk about in a second, move it over to the planning work done and corridor alignment fairly certain column. So that was a win. And I want to also, in the next slide, point out one more aspect that I thought was new for the Bicycle Superhighway Implementation Plan. We put together sort of snapshot maps of implementation for each of the 17 corridors, showing what phase different segments are in based on whether that's just conceptual or if it's fully built. And then I want to also on this slide show some examples of the Guadalupe River Trail that you can see that are complete, that hopefully will add to that experience, as we mentioned before, that makes a bikeway super, the artwork and making it joyful and accessible and connected. So with that, I will stop talking and transfer it over to Brent, and he will go over the Central Bikeway study in particular.
Yeah, so great to be here in this space with you all today. My name's Brent Pearse. I'm a planner. My pronouns are he, him. I was the project manager for Central Bikeway. So Lola's really walked us through kind of the large part of the funnel for our superhighway network in the county, and then we're going to kind of narrow it down to this one corridor. Central Bikeway, we went through a feasibility analysis and created 10% concept design plans, which our board recently adopted in May, and the city of Santa Clara recently adopted in April. So this is a 10-mile corridor here in blue, going from kind of the Sunnyvale western border on the left to East San Jose on the right. And you can see those three green lines. Those are our really important north-south trail corridors that exist today in the county. They move a lot of commuters on bikes and are also used for recreational activities. Central kind of goes through the hub, the core of Santa Clara, the economic engine along El Camino. El Camino is a state highway as well, so it's not with its own other design challenges in delivering this facility. Caltrans was our partner and funder on this study, so we worked closely with their team on that. It connects to great destinations, Santa Clara University, large transit centers, Santa Clara Station, also where our future BART terminus will be in South County, in Santa Clara, downtown, and then connects to the existing Berryessa BART station as well. So we really wanted to lead this project differently than we've done before. We did that with community in mind. So not only did we engage with community, but community was also part of our team. We worked with CDOs directly on our team. The Bike Coalition was one of our primary subs. And then we had two other subs, Meta LLC and the Guadalupe River Conservancy, that really helped us deliver this project. I want to emphasize how important their role was on this project, and that we could not have delivered this project without them during the challenging last 3 years that we had. I mean, really, truly, we would not have been able to connect with community the way we did without these agencies out in the field talking to people through one of the most challenging times I think any of us can remember in our lives. We really learned some really interesting things through this study, that if we build a superhighway with high quality features that's direct, and really all those super features that Lola covered earlier, that 47% of these people would use this bikeway to actually, for utility needs, right? To get to school, to get to work, to actually do those mode shift things that we're really intending for facilities like this. And 30% of those people don't do that now. They only ride for recreation. This was a huge number. We were not expecting a number this high in our surveys and our engagement. We generally see this number like less than 5%. So, and of course, the biggest thing, people want to be separated from traffic, right? To do these things, they want clear separation and protection. So I'm going to walk you through some concept designs. I realized as Kimberly was going through her presentation, I was like, oh, I better throw some cross sections in here. So I quickly threw some cross sections in here for you all to see some details, because I didn't have that in the original presentation. I'm going to walk you through three segments that are kind of the most three different segments of the corridor. This is El Camino Real, right? Major state highway, 6 lanes. The vision for El Camino Real is a side running bikeway of 7-foot width. It will narrow slightly as it goes around our transit stops, VTA transit stops on the corridor. This is intended to be built within the existing curb to curb right away. Santa Clara's council has approved parking removal on almost 95% of their entire section within their city. So it will be envisioned to be built in that space. We've done some really key things here with the design to enhance our safety. On El Camino Real, the bikeway is envisioned to be sidewalk running. It's designed to have high quality wayfinding, pedestrian lighting, and as you cross through the numerous curb cuts that we have along El Camino, it will also be raised with those sections as well. Puts the biker a little higher than you would be on the street, provides a little more attention in this really kind of conflict zone that we can see here in this scene. So here's the cross section and right away. So we have about 104 feet to work with. We have programmed 11-foot travel lanes, generally a 3 to 4 foot buffer for the majority of the bikeway, and really wide, comfortable bike lanes at 7 feet. That's one of the key features we see as a superhighway, is providing a little bit more space for passing and merging and things like that to provide nice travel for cyclists. Moving to Heading Street, this is a more intimate street in kind of San Jose in the northern section of downtown. This is an example of what a protected intersection could look like. So the entire 10 miles will either have they'll have a protected intersection at every signalized intersection. I think it's about 20 plus intersections that will be protected. And there's over 40 minor intersections, and I'll show you a detail of what that will look like next. But for signalized intersections, we intend to have full protection. Again, you can see a really kind of emphasized example of what wayfinding could look like here. Wayfinding for long distance travel on bikes is really, really important, and I can't understate this enough. You want to get off the BART train at Berryessa and go to a key destination and ride Central Bikeway. We want to be really clear for you as a user, if you've never been here, how to travel over a long distance to do that. So we see wayfinding be a really important part of our network. We envision on the street too a little bit more green infrastructure, possibly in the separation. Of course, we have to figure that out a little bit more as we advance the design. So still 7-foot bikeways, 4-foot barrier, smaller lanes, retaining some parking. There is some parking removal at certain sections, generally at the intersection approaches in this part of the segment. So on Taylor Street, we're electing to do a 2-way facility. There was a lot of back and forth with the community, with the city of San Jose about this, but we chose to do a 2-way facility for a period of about 1.5 miles on the western approach to the BART station. And the reason for that is there's an existing 2-way facility already exiting the BART station. So another one of those key super features for bike highways is not a lot of change in your facility type. So you really want to be clear for the cyclist what the facility will be like and kind of maintain that kind of typology for as much time or distance as you possibly can. So what you're looking at right now is a minor intersection. So this is likely like possibly a stop controlled intersection. So at every stop controlled intersection, again, along the entire 10-mile alignment, we envision raising the bikeway and the sidewalk at the stop sign where the bikeway is at street level, creating kind of a table or a platform. Again, calling out the pedestrians here who are not the primary focus of the project, but we see improving safety for them is very important at these intersections as well. And then also for the cyclists. So on the left, cross section for Taylor. On the right side of that, you can see a 10-foot 2-way cycle track. There are places where it is also 12. So it kind of it goes from 10 to 12 depending on the cross section, but this is a typical cross section, of course. And on the right is kind of a plan view we're looking at of that raised table. So you can see the bikeway kind of rise up as it approaches the intersection, and then the sidewalk also being raised with the stop bar behind both of those. $213 million. Does that shock anyone? Sometimes that's really shocking. Wow, $200 million for a bike project? Are you crazy, VTA? But I want to remind everyone how visionary and transformational this is, right? This is a 10-mile project with 20 protected intersections and 50 other minor intersection enhancements. This is not out of scale with a bus rapid transit project or an interchange project, both which VTA also deliver in our county. We see this as having regional significance and huge gains for the regional network of biking. We have applied for a federal raise grant. We'll know in June, fingers crossed. We'd love if you all could cross your fingers for us as well. Our implementation goals for this project are to do all the design and environmental for the whole corridor as one. And working with our partners and our design partners, Alta, who I believe are on the call today, setting this project up for funding, we really felt that that was the best strategy. Likely will deliver construction in phases, given that it have unique challenges depending on the jurisdiction and location for the project. So with that, that's what we have for you today. Happy to take questions.
Excellent. Thank you to Lola and Brent and VTA. This looks like an excellent project, and I'm sure for both this and Valencia, I'll have to find my way out there to try them out once constructed. In the meantime, I guess one question I have to start off while people are, again, as a reminder, feel free to either write your questions in the chat and we'll answer them in the order they're received, or raise your hand and using the Zoom feature and we'll answer those in the order received. While those are being drafted and submitted, one question that I have is, I noticed some of the introductory slides included, it sounds like a lot of this is inspired, and it sounds very inspired by Dutch design. And then towards the end, I was noticing the bike lanes were street level. And then when you were coming to those raised crosswalks at the minor side street intersections, they would rise up to sidewalk level and then drop back down afterwards. Was there any consideration given towards having the separated bike facilities be at sidewalk level, including between intersections, so that way the cyclist is maintaining a steady elevation?
Yes, there was. The cost probably would have been another 50 million. So the sidewalk level portion is just for El Camino Real, which is a little under 3 miles. So it'll be 3 miles of sidewalk level bikeway, and the rest is intended to be at sidewalk level, at street level. So except at those minor intersections. So there's a lot of drainage challenges we still need to work through in future design. And whenever you kind of pull the curb inward, you have to think about that. And so there's still more to come. And again, this is a vision and a concept at this point. So we're open to iterating as we move forward with our cities.
Great, thank you. So turning it over to our participant questions, we'll start with Jill, who has a question. She says, "Good afternoon. I'm curious about the length of the corridor. I'm imagining that the survey result of demand for biking on the superhighway could potentially result in a positive driver for placemaking and economic activity, e.g. transformative. Was this aspect involved in any planning, or do you foresee it touching future phases?"
I would say yes. And hi, Jill. So, as we surveyed, we asked people a lot about features and amenities and those things that make this experience more joyful, right? So Lola talked a little bit about joy, and we actually used joy as a measurement criteria in the selection of our final alternative. Joy, the feeling of happiness, what you experience as you move through a place, right? Because when you ride your bicycle and you move through your community, it's not just A to B, right? It's, do you have water fountains and facilities? Are you next to a park? How can your family get to a place where you want to shop? And so that was very important to us. And we talked to the community a lot about that. We didn't have enough, I would say, in our scope really to kind of dive into economic development necessarily, or the numbers or things like that it would generate. But we'll likely need to have more conversation with community and with cities, particularly on El Camino as we move forward.
Rachel Donovan responds that including joy, happiness as a criterion also reflects the transformational aspect of this. And I wholly agree. I think especially, you mentioned we had a difficult 3 years. And I think in today's age, any way we can increase joy of the traveling public is very important.
I did also in the chat drop a link to an article that I see was posted last month, but I just read it yesterday, so very topical, from AASHTO about whether joy or happiness is a new metric that will start being used in transportation projects moving forward, engineering projects, planning projects moving forward. So this really is something that's new, and we're probably going to start seeing it across the country, hopefully here soon.
Hopefully so, and hopefully that'll help bolster efforts. I notice sometimes with like roadworks projects or bridges, you know, they'll add that extra 2% to the budget to make it just look that much prettier. And sometimes you get that pushback, and maybe this is a nice antidote to that. Moving on to Eric has a question on, with all these protected bike lanes, how do cities plan on maintaining these? The green paint is $10 to $15 per square foot to install, and does each city have a 6-foot wide street sweeper to keep these clean? Where will this new maintenance cost come from? And also, how does a visually impaired person distinguish the two areas?
Great questions, Eric, or multiple questions. Yeah, green paint is expensive. And, you know, we talked a lot about our cities, whether green paint will be used everywhere, actually. Maybe bike superhighways will dabble with some different kinds of design ideas, but generally probably within the intersections themselves will maintain those standards. Well, definitely San Jose has a street sweeper that's capable of sweeping 7 feet. And that's one design kind of barrier that we set at the beginning of the project. They can sweep 7 feet comfortably in their protected bikeway network that they have now. Santa Clara does not currently have that capability, which is one reason why they've been a little bit slower to adopt protected bikeways, but they are beginning to move forward with that. And we've talked to them about strategies on how to maintain. The other thing to think about too is when you raise the bikeway to sidewalk level on El Camino, that becomes less of a concern because then the bikeway can be cleaned more like a sidewalk. So there are advantages to raising the bikeway over to keeping it in kind of in a channel or a trench on the street. Particularly on El Camino, where we're going to have some separation, there's still a little bit of unclarity as best practice here in our industry. I think we all are challenged with what a delineated, separated barrier means between a pedestrian way. Caltrans is coming out with more guidance in their DIB 894, which they just released a couple of weeks ago for draft. I recommend you take a look at it. But the general guidance here is 12 to 24 inches of some type of truncated surface between the pedestrian way and the bikeway. So we'll have to explore that. And we have kind of some design criteria in there for them to definitely be different materials.
Great, thank you.
Difference.
Rachel asks, how much state funding could be available to help with the $200 million VTA project?
All of ATP, please. I don't know. You know, we're having a lot of conversations with our delegates. We talked with CTC staff. We elected to not apply for ATP last round for other reasons, to go after another project, which we were successful for, which Lola's working on, which is a complete streets project on Bascom and San Jose. I think it's pretty clear statewide that we need some dedicated bike superhighway funding. I think our peers and staff at state level feel the same way. It's just a challenge of working collectively to advocate for that in our budget, right? This project is, we're told, is the transformational kind of projects the state wants to see submitted. Recognizing though that it's a huge scope, right? It could take a significant part of the ATP program or other like programs, which would reduce funding, and that's not very equitable statewide. So it's something that we think about really seriously internally as well. It's a challenge.
Thanks for that response. The next question is actually mine, recalling back on Eric's question about the cost of green paint. And I was just wondering if green colored asphalt was considered as an alternative to paint, or the technical challenges that might be inherent there too.
Honestly, I don't think we've gotten that far in our design. You know, we're just at 10% concept. These are great ideas. I know there's even some new water-based green paint that's coming out that was just announced that is supposed to have higher wear life. There's also, I know, some interesting surfaces that New Jersey's experimenting with right now that has some tactile feedback. I can't remember the product type name, but it's supposed to wear a little bit better. So open to all those options from this community. These are great ideas. Keep them coming.
Excellent. So Xixing asks, well, actually, I guess it's not a question. They just wanted to give a shout out to the Guadalupe River Trail and Los Gatos Creek Trail, and says riding on them brought them a lot of joy and happiness. Excited to see new bikeways. So
Riding on those bring me joy as well. So
Me too.
highly recommended. Glad
to see some appreciation in the comments. Speaking of, joy and the need for that in these times. Attendee from TJKM asks, as a broader question for the bike superhighways, are there plans to retrofit seasonal trails subject to flooding or trails that are technically closed after dark?
That's a really good question. Maybe. The problem is right of way. And as I mentioned, the majority of them are next to creeks and rivers. So there's the water district who has very strict regulations, and rightfully so, because a lot of our waterways and trails are part of bird migration areas and other areas for wildlife in our county. And so we want to respect that, make sure we're not harming them by any means. But we want to also make sure that we can still access these areas for transportation reasons. So it's a tough balance. We are working with them, and we have worked with them for several years now to try to figure out locations where this could work, or types of lighting that could potentially work to make this more of a viable option. But it is definitely, as Rachel has mentioned, it's a big topic, and something that we do want to move forward with and work with the Water District and Caltrans and others on, because as you said, in the winter, it gets dark at 5:30. That's when most of us gets off work. And so it's, it just makes riding a bike not viable at that time. And so that's the opposite of what we want, especially in the Bay Area when we have beautiful weather most of the time in the winter. So.
And I'll just quickly add, I know we're getting short on time here, but in our feasibility analysis, we had narrowed down to 3 kind of alternatives that we studied in more detail, 2 of which included significant trail segments in the network. Those segments from a perceived safety perspective, not like conflict safety, ranked lower for that reason. Just looking at Rachel's further comment here, right? Because perceived safety on trails, there's less access points, they're darker, and there are other things that come along with that. And they also flood, at least in our county in certain parts. And so a bike superhighway, again, needs to be accessible 365 days a year to be an effective bike superhighway facility. So those alignments ranked lower from that perspective.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much. I think that's going to wrap up our question and answer session. I see, and I was going to say Rachel is asking for contact information, which Lola just provided in the comments. And I'm also going to go ahead and share in the chat our YouTube page. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to that page sometime in the next week or so. So feel free to check that out, check our other presentations out. There was also some chatter kind of in between presentations about ITE is embarking on an endeavor to be more inclusive and have more offerings for our planner members. So thank you, as Lola knows, to our planners for being here. ITE is looking to expand to not just engineers. Planners are very important, very critical to our profession, and we're excited you're here. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you as well, especially to Kimberly, Brent, and Lola, our presenters. I think this has been an excellent meeting. Love to see everyone here. Love to see these presentations. And we'll go ahead and keep that chat open just for another minute or two so everyone can gather all of those links and emails that they desire. And with that, thank you so much everyone for attending. Hope to see you at our next meeting.
Thank you.